take those forward. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Daniel. How are you?
Salam wa rahmatullah. Can you hear me, Sheikh?
Yep, alhamdulillah. We are live on YouTube at the moment. So I'm just going to send the link to admin and they're going to send it around. So just to let you know, I'm just doing that right now as we speak.
Salam wa rahmatullah. Can you hear me?
Okay, we are going to start, inshallah, within the next few minutes. We've sent out the links. So if anyone's going to join us on YouTube, they are more than welcome to join us there. Or on the other hand, those of you who have registered, you can join us on Zoom. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Nice to see you again. We have currently one attendee on Zoom. So assalamu alaikum to Sister Natalia.
Sister Layla, is it? Yeah.
Yep, Sister Layla. And assalamu alaikum to the three who have joined us on YouTube. So inshallah, we're just going to wait till 5:35 and we can straight away start. Inshallah. Do you have a PowerPoint, Sheikh, that you want to?
Not today.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. So before we start off in the next 2 minutes, for those of us who have joined us on YouTube, then Jazakallah for that, or Jazakallah for commenting as well. So Sheikh Mahmoud, Assalamu alaikum. Sister Bilqis, brothers, how to join your website. So could you explain what you mean by that, as in to join us via Zoom? If that's the question, I will just put up the link on our to our website, and I will share that in the chat section of YouTube. And all you need to do is whichever session you want to join in, just go to that day. So if you want to join this session, all you need to do is go to Monday and then the special educational needs session at 5:30. And if you click on register, you can just register online, and it is pretty simple as that. Yep, that's it, Sister Bilqis. So I will just post that one more time, and you can even sign up to any more of the sessions you like. That way you can contact us directly. So we've got another minute. What we will do is, if you have any questions that you had about special educational needs, about anything to do with that, and especially about madrasas and special educational needs, please put down your questions either on YouTube or on Zoom, and we can start by answering some of those questions or taking a note of them if we are unable to answer them. If not, then we will be starting in the next minute or so. Okay, so Daniel, I think we are ready to start because it is now 5:35. So you're more than welcome to start off, and then if there's questions in between, I'll inshallah bring them up if I can. Jazakallah, Sheikh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I thought it would be good to just recap what we've spoken about over the last couple of weeks. It's the third week we're doing these webinars now. So the first week that we started this, we were talking about why we sort of targeted SEN within sort of Fatima Kates within the Madrasah, and why it's a very, very important issue that needs to be sort of spoken about across Makatib and madrasas across the country, really. Special education needs has been sort of neglected within our communities for quite some time. So we spoke about that in the first week. Last week, we spoke about attitudes to special education needs in both the non-Muslim community and the Muslim community as well, and how that sort of developed over sort of the last 20, 30 years or so, and sort of where we are today and what we could do to sort of change certain mindsets, and how this is sort of an ongoing need, really, and by doing things like this webinar, and by sort of bringing greater awareness about special education needs, is sort of a one step towards doing that, if you like. Today, what I wanted to talk about with Ustad Hamid was the importance of having children generally, be they having SEN or not, really, having them in an Islamic environment, and why that's very, very important for their tarbiyah and their upbringing, and why it's important, essentially. Sheikh, I wonder if you had any thoughts on that in terms of the Islamic environment for children generally.
Yeah, I think there's something very important about this. Yeah. And it's just the fact that, for instance, and this is just through our experience at our madrasa alone, that we kind of get this sense that when children with special needs are coming to our madrasa, or just they're going to madrasas in general, and this feeling is also from parents as well, and this is something that we realize and we try and work towards our best. We try our best, what's in our ability, is the fact that, and this is the way I see it, right? A child with special educational needs, and when we say special educational needs, we're talking in the framework of the terminology of schools when they use SEN or SEND. A child, if we come into their shoes and we try and see the world from their perspective, right? So they have various institutes or organizations that they work with or they go to on a weekly basis, right? So let's give an example that a student called, I don't know, Abdullah, okay? So there is Abdullah, okay, and he has certain needs, and we won't specify any because we want to keep it open. His parents realize that he has special needs, and they're making an effort to ensure that he goes to various organizations. He goes to different clubs, so he doesn't feel left out. Okay, which is a good thing, which is positive. So now here's student A or student Abdullah. He goes to school, okay, 5 days a week, and within the school they have the facility of a special educational needs department, where they cater for all the individual needs of all their special needs students. And it's taken very seriously, very professionally. And the student is kind of taking that experience on and is now building a kind of an opinion about school. Then after school, and when we say after school, it could be in the evenings or on the weekends, same child goes for, say, boxing or taekwondo. And now they approach the coach, and the coach is also aware of the special educational needs. And that's always, and as a result of that, the student is kind of building trust in these individuals and organizations. And then he goes from one to another, and then finally comes the madrasa. And then a student goes to madrasa, and it can be any madrasa, there's no specifics. Goes to a madrasa, and then finds that firstly, there's no special educational needs department. Goes to madrasa and then finds that the teachers are completely unaware of the nature of special educational needs. Okay, and at this point, regardless of whether schools, if we agree with the way schools manage special education, just regardless of that, it's just the fact the student is going through his weekly life and he's building this opinion about, for example, school, the daily school and the professionalism from there, the different clubs. And remember, when clubs are opened up, now, if you want to open a boxing club, a football club, an archery club, okay, or any kind of club, the people at the top, they have to do certain courses. Okay, they have to do the safeguarding course, which is a compulsory element. They've got to do so many different courses. Without that, they cannot get the qualification or the certification they need in order to open up their facility. And as a result of that, they have, at least, even if it's a bit, they have some understanding of special educational needs. But when it comes to madrasas, and we're talking in general, however, I mean, there is a lot of good practice happening now as we speak. There are madrasas that are ensuring that teachers know about special educational needs. I'm kind of talking about the extreme now, where it's the concept of special educational needs is not there.
Yeah.
Many teachers think that so-and-so child, student A, student Abdullah, he's not learning, he's not being able to recite or regurgitate the information that's given to him in whatever form it is. If it's if it's the Quran, the Arabic, the Qaida, Islamic studies, or memory, du'as, whatever. He's not doing it because A, he doesn't take out time at home, even though he's telling this, I spend a lot of time, but the teacher doesn't believe him. Or he's unable to focus for whatever needs, and teacher thinks that he's messing around. And then what's happening, that what concerns me is a student A, student Abdullah, okay, he's going through from one institute to another, and then he's building up this opinion, he's building up this worldview as a result of his weekly experience. And what he ultimately does is, by the time he's 20, 25, or it is towards the end of his teenage, he's going to have built up this worldview about schools, the secular system, the capitalist system that's out there, and then on the other hand, the Muslim institutes that he went to, the Muslim experiences that he's had. And my point here, Sheikh, is, and coming back to your question on why Islamic environments are important for children with special needs, the way I look at it and the way I've been thinking about it is, when that child gets to that age, when they are to then decide what lifestyle they are to choose, because we live in a free country, there's no escaping that. It's, and the problem is, back at home, and when I say back home, I'm referring to a lot of us who have come over from like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, many Arab countries, etc. Is they still have chances to learn about Islam throughout their life, because they'll have uncles, aunties. I mean, we're not saying that any of the countries are perfect Islamic, countries at all. No, far from it. But at least there's that bit more. Yeah. Here, there's this whole diversity of Islam. So there are chances of that even confusing a person when they want to find Islam later on. And that's why madrasas are important, because they give you that somewhat foundation to work from, or that should be the case. And then that foundation should also be giving each child at least the confidence to go out there and to face the world as a Muslim. Now, this special educational needs child, he's going through these different institutes. He is seeing the ones that are at least apparently appreciating him, and he's taking that in. And on the other hand, there's Muslim institutes where he's not finding that, and that is a huge problem. And that now special educational needs and this whole framework is now in somewhat, you can say, at the forefront and somewhat responsible for the iman of children with special needs. So it is very, very, very important, very, very deep. There's something that's come up on the Q&A. Can I just open that? Okay, it's wa alaikum assalam from Sister Layla.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's my take on it. That's where I think that's the foundation. He's building up this experience. And if we look back, and we've spoken about this before, so I'm not going to go into it in detail, but just Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and his approach, regardless of special needs, his approach to every single individual and their needs, whatever they may be, and his focus for each one and the love that he's given to each one, I think that should be for us to take out our principles of how we are to deal with children with special needs, children with any kind of need, even children who, for them, some of the work that's given to them is too easy. They need more. So how do we differentiate? Yeah. So that's where I think this is incredibly important. That's my take on it, Sheikh.
Yeah, well, we spoke about sort of the risk, if you like, of these young individuals, because they haven't had the right experiential learning, if you like, potentially leaving Islam because their needs haven't been catered towards, and that sort of dichotomy of how they've been looked after, if you like, within sort of the school system compared to what's happened at Madrasah or within the Masajid, where they've sort of gone through that learning environment. It's interesting. I mean, I was thinking about this with regards to our own Madrasah, and sort of the experiences of some parents. And of course, we are not always going to get things 100% accurate and always right with certain kids. There was one example of, I think, a child who had a number of different of SENs, of needs, if you like. Autism being one of them, having sleep apnea as well. And their progress was ultimately very, very slow within the madrasa. And I remember us having this conversation with the mother, and she was asking, why is his progress so slow? I could perhaps do more with him at home in a one-to-one than what he would get within sort of this environment. And I think what we were trying to say to this mother was, that could be true, and obviously you have to put that time in with that child. You have to give them that one-to-one. But what they are getting in terms of an Islamic education from this environment is very, very important. Being around other Muslims, hearing about different stories that they might get in Islamic studies, that sort of experience doesn't really sort of match up to how they might be progressing in their qaida, for example. I think this child was quite young, he was 5 or 6. Him naturally having Muslim friends, being in that sort of environment, we were trying to put across to this mother. was very, very, very beneficial. There was a hadith that I wanted to share, Sheikh. I think it was narrated in Sahihain, Bukhari and Muslim. So the similitude of good company and that of bad company is that of the owner of musk and the one blowing the bellows. The owner of musk would either offer you some free of charge, or you would buy it from him, or you would smell its pleasant fragrance. And as for the one who is a blacksmith, he either burns your clothes or you smell a repugnant smell. So sort of looking at that hadith, I think it just shows you the importance of having that good company and being amongst those who would benefit you in some way. Relaying that to our sort of madrasa environment, if we're having an environment that is beneficial to that child, beneficial to everybody else, they'll ultimately gain from that. I was just thinking about what one of the other kids, I think he was diagnosed with autism at some point, and he was quite sort of gifted and talented as well. And one of the things that we always try and do is try and get the best out of that particular child when it comes to their skill sets. Trying to match them up with something that they're really, really good at. One child comes to mind. He was really, really good at sort of web design and creating videos and things like that. So we utilized him and use those skills to get him to volunteer for our madrasa. So it's about using these skill sets of individuals within that environment to make it beneficial for them. That's what I was sort of thinking of, Sheikh.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that whichever environment you go in, you will take a bit of that environment back with you. Just like the example of the the perfume seller.
Yeah.
Even if you go there and you don't actively purchase a perfume, so you're not, for instance, in that scenario, you've gone in and you just want to see what's out there, and you're not taking any perfume home. What you're still doing is you're touching different things. You're maybe trying some of it out, and you're walking away being, smelling better than you did before. And I think that's the message that you're giving, that even with children with special needs, or children without any kind of severe needs, that when they go to a madrasa, I think the problem that we are facing when it comes to madrasas and schools, I think, is with our broader understanding of the world when it comes, and being a parent myself, and when it comes to parents, sometimes we think that the policies and what they're giving to us at school should be used everywhere, right? So I remember when schools started talking about progress, and progress, okay? And I've always been opposed to that kind of approach, right? And it's because we kind of, we're trying to make robots out of human beings, and that's never going to, turn out nice. And I think it's a problem when, as parents, we take any kind of policy without fully understanding the context, without fully trying to step back a bit and think, okay, my child here is a human. My child here is not necessarily going to always work in a certain way. But if they are pushed down a certain way, it's just not going to work for them. So when it comes to, sometimes we think progress is going to be linear in some aspect. You have to keep on. It doesn't work like that. I mean, for example, I've been doing a bit of archery, right? And I go into the to various archery ranges all over London. There's some 2-3 good ones, and then you take some shots. In 1 week, you're doing really, really well. Second session you go, it's really good. Third session you go, it's fantastic. And then you think your fourth session, you're going to totally be brilliant at it. And that fourth week, your arrows are all over the place.
You might have an off day. Yeah,
absolutely. So with humans, it's never going to be like just in the graph just going up and up. That's not what humans are about. I think the only being where you have like a flat line of continuous kind of where there's no progress is the angels. But they don't need that kind of, it's just that straight line. And I think it's only with prophets where you have like a continual growth of them, because in any situation they're in, they're able to overcome those situations in the best of ways and become, light and examples for the rest of us. So I think that's key, that when it comes to schools, and there are certain fundamental things that have to be there, right? But I think the most crucial for madrasas and for parents to understand this is that when it comes to madrasas, should we be viewing them in the same way as we see schools? Personally, I don't think we should. I don't think we should. And that's one of the reasons why in our madrasa at Fatima Elizabeth Front History, we decided to no longer have exams. And there's, various reasons for that. Okay. But one of the main reasons is, okay, at school, there's a reasoning, there's a logic behind having exams, because even though there should be more avenues to not just test, but assess a person, there should be way more avenues. And what happens is, so in schools you have, you have GCSEs, then that work, the grade that you get, it kind of informs the parents and students to then work onto their A levels, and then ultimately they get, they move on to degrees and postgrad, etc. So there's that logical reasoning. So it's to ensure that they get into some kind of career where they can work into. Why do we need tests and exams in madrasa? And I've seen many madrasas where the only reason, I still don't understand the logic of exams, the way they are taking place in madrasas, where there comes the end of term, studies stop for like a month, some places 2 months, and they utilize that time to kind of go over things, regurgitate them, so that they can pass their exams. And they may be written, exams or oral exams. And ultimately, as soon as the students get their grades, there a lot of madrasas, there's no standardization as well, right? And then what happens is, once the students are given their grades, they have something called the jalsa, right? So in its linguistics, and jalsa means place of sitting. So parents are called in, family is called in, they sit down, and then what happens is external speakers called in to give a little speech. Students are given their gifts. Some of them do some nasheeds and Quran, and everyone says MashaAllah, and then holidays. What happens to those exam results? First of all, nothing. Right? What's the purpose of them? Okay, is it just going over the things before? Is it necessary that we have this once in a whole year? And remember, by doing this whole, gifting out of things, where you have the number 1, number 2, number 3, what happens to the other, 26 or 7 students in the class?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what we're ultimately doing is we're pushing forward the the top 5%, and then we're just relying on that. Whereas if we go to the madrasa, which I call the madrasa of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the madrasa of life that Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam presented to us, it was very different. Right? It was based on, and this is why Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned many occasions, right, that inna Allah la yanzuru ila suwarikum wa amwalikum, that Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam doesn't look at your external or your wealth, walakin yanzur ila qulubikum wa a'malikum, he looks at what's in your hearts and your actions. So at the forefront of the madrasa should be our hearts, the spiritual, and then how that translates into our physical. So how are we going to test someone on that? And are we supposed to test someone on that? And then looking at it from a child's perspective, right? Is it just about the learning of facts to then being able to regurgitate them and present them to an external examiner? Or is it more deeper than that? And I think that's where, because the only time that there have been madrasas in the West before us was in Al-Andalus, right? And I'm talking here from the perspective of Ibn Khaldun, rahimahullah, who's done a really, his magnum opus is Al-Muqaddimah, right, where he talks about the rise and fall of various nations. But then he also gives a bit of he becomes a bit of Ofsted, right? He goes to Andalus and then Al-Maghrib, as in Morocco, Tunis and Egypt, and then he gives a summary of all the madrasas and how they differ. And it's very interesting how out of all of them, when it comes to Andalus, they are doing far more in terms of education than any of the Muslim countries. And that's something that maybe we can explore, later on. But just the fact that the only time that the West has had madrasas was in Al-Andalus. But here we are again. And one interesting point, Sheikh, I'm sorry for taking a lot of your time.
No.
And I've seen there's some questions coming up as well, so we will look at them as well.
We'll look at that as well, yeah.
What's very interesting is the comparison that Ibn Khaldun gives between the madrasas in Andalus and madrasas in Morocco, and then also in Tunis, right? These three, let's just take those. He's given many more, but let's take these three. So in a very basic summary, in Al-Maghrib, in Morocco, what's at the forefront of the madrasas is just the Quran. Okay, so if you're able to recite the Quran, only then you can move on to other sciences. That's a basic, simplified, very simplistic summary.
Yeah.
Okay. If you can't do that, that's it. You don't continue. And then later on, when people grow up, they end up coming back to the Quran and trying to learn it then. And then you have in Al-Andalus, where they have a wide range of things they focus on. They focus on things like the Quran, obviously, that's at the forefront for all educational institutes in the Muslim world. The Quran, Hadith, poetry, science, philosophy, all of that is happening in a madrasa. Okay, and then a similar thing is taking place in Tunis. So the question is, why was that happening in Morocco? Why is it in Al-Andalus, so far ahead? And then why is it similar to Al-Andalus in Tunis? Just to give you a very broad, very brief kind of reasoning is, if you look at it, compare it to our day and age today. Okay, you go back to India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the madrasas over there, and I'll give you the reason as to why I'm giving that example.
Yeah.
You go to a madrasa, the focus in most of the madrasas would be to be able to recite the Quran. That's it. And then a few basics when it comes to fiqh. And then you get on with it for the rest of your life. And then you ask around your local imams and ulama and uncles and aunt, whoever it is. And then you get on with your lives. And then what's happening and similarly, I feel the same in Morocco. It's just the Quran, and then you learn the basics and, you live your life. In Andalus, it's not like that. And it can't be like that, because Andalus is the epicenter at that moment of education in the world. Right? It's like the jewel of the world. That's what it was called, Al-Andalus, the jewel of the world. And they are intermingling there, obviously, with people of other faiths. So you have Christians, obviously, right? Because there were majority Christians before. But then you also have Jews who had gained very favorable positions with the Khulafa, the Khalifas at the time of Al-Andalus. And they were given those positions. And a lot of them were also ambassadors for the Muslim, for Andalus. And especially because of the whole translation thing as well. So you hear of scholars like Musa ibn Maymun, who was Jewish, right? In the Western world, they call him Maimonides, Moses Maimonides. He's like one of the greatest scholars the Jewish world has ever produced, and he's coming from the Muslim world, right? And then later on, when they're expelled from Spain, he goes and becomes one of the doctors of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, right? So this was the Muslim world. That. So in Al-Andalus, they had no chance. They could not just stick to what Morocco was doing, Al-Maghrib was doing, because it wouldn't work. They had far greater challenges because of the diverse, landscape that they found themselves in Al-Andalus. And then why was Tunis similar to Al-Andalus? And that's where Ibn Khaldun was born, right? Is because when the expulsion was taking place, a majority of the scholars, they went and migrated to Tunis, and they took that system of Al-Andalus to Tunis. So that copy and paste was taking place. What we're finding here today around us, and alhamdulillah, a lot of things are changing, and they always will be changing, but it may need a bit of speeding up. That's where I'm coming from. So you have the examples of back home, all right? When we moved over to England, for instance, and we started establishing some of the very first madrasas in wholesale, let's say. I mean, Islam has been here before in dribs and drabs, dating all the way back to, Crusades, and even before that, right? But it's in wholesale is coming now, isn't it? And what's happened is when we found ourselves in this situation, the easiest thing to do is copy and paste, plagiarism, right? So we just took the madrasas we were experiencing back at home and pasted them here. So that's how we find ourselves in the madrasas today. So it's pretty much been copy and paste. However, those madrasas might be fine for the context back at home because it's majority
It's a
people are
Muslim
Muslim
country.
there.
Yeah.
So it's almost similar to the Al-Maghrib model of the Quran first and nothing else, trying to apply that in Spain. And then that would have been more problematic at the time because they needed confident Muslims. They needed confident leaders because remember, they were a leading minority. Muslims at the time, they weren't the majority in Spain. They were they were a minority, but they were a ruling minority, which is very interesting. And that brings up its own challenges. And that's where the whole idea of giving confidence to all the children and every single one of them. We can't just say, yeah, we've tried here, let's go. As Muslims and madrasas, we need to try our best, yes. And we need to get to the stage where we are way ahead because of the teachings of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right?
Yeah.
We need to be way ahead of that because our belief is Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is rahmatul lil alameen. He's a mercy for mankind. So this is where, and I can't remember what the actual question was or how we got to this stage, but it's just my thoughts on a madrasa here in the West, and why we need to move away from that copy and paste model and trying to rethink why. So and it does go back to epistemology. So it does go back to the why question on why do we have madrasas here in the West? We understand the notion of having them everywhere in general, but what is the added importance of madrasas here in the West, and especially here in a country like the UK? So that's where I think it's very, very important.
You make quite a good point, Sheikh, about the Muslims in Al-Andalus being in an environment where they had to deal with non-Muslims all the time. And I think there's a sort of striking similarity in terms of the position we find ourselves in. Yes, we're not a ruling minority, but we are a minority and we are growing in numbers. I think there was an interesting comment, Sheikh. So our madrasa's way of teaching is broadly based on India-Pakistani's way. When I was little, they forced us Gujarati, but not Arabic. Even in the 60s, 70s, our question is my own teaching. Not much has changed. I think things have changed in some levels, especially in the last maybe 10, 15 years or so. You're absolutely right. Definitely in the 90s, but we still had that sort of copy and paste model, which Sheikh Ahmed spoke about, just really sitting down in front of the qaidas and sort of reciting and not moving beyond that in a lot of manners. There's another comment, Sheikh. I don't know if you want to read it out.
Yep, we can do that. There's just a smaller one on YouTube, and then we'll come to the bigger one, which is there. Salam, I think parents need support to work with their children at home, especially when they come to us once a week. Yes, that's an important point. But I think here what we're doing is pretty much focusing on the madrasas themselves and madrasas in general. So each madrasa may have their own policy on how they support parents. But yes, that's true. Madrasas do need to think about that as well. But I think here it's more so we're trying to focus on the madrasas themselves and whether during the experience of the madrasa and whilst the child comes in from the door and then leaves the door at the end, what has the madrasa given in terms of similar to the perfume seller, right? How much have we given to the child during that short 4 hour or 2 hour or 1 hour, whatever time it is, have we given by way of trying to be in line with prophetic teaching, with the example that he gave about the perfume seller. So I think it's more so that we're focusing on that. What have we done as teachers, or what can we do as teachers individually, but also as a madrasa as a whole to cater for our children? And I think one of the key things is to give them that love that's Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has taught us. The way I look at it, and we speak to our teachers about, is for us, our Ofsted is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, and we've got to imagine that every time we are teaching, and which we need to give this human example, because obviously Allah is always watching us. We give this example of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to make it a bit more understandable for us. That you've got to imagine that if Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was to come and sit down in an Islamic studies lesson and sit at the back with clipboard and take down notes, how would we teach? And more than just teach, how would we make the children feel? Especially in the West here, and especially in the environment that we're in, how would we make each and every child feel? So now the Islamic studies lesson and the role of the teacher goes beyond just the teacher. You're playing a role of way more than that. You're now presenting Islam to these children, and you're giving them kind of ignorance or droplets of experience, that when it comes to later on, for them to make a decision on what life will they live. Will it be a secular one, non-religious one, or will it be one of the beauty of Islam and the simplicity of Islam? And not only that, but also a form of Islam, right? That's not one that's narrow, that's very narrow. It's got to be broad. And the way to do that is we go back to Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and look at his life as a whole. So we look at his life holistically, and not just him as a worshipper, for instance, not just Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as someone who's constantly just leading the prayer, or someone who's just teaching in the mosque. What is Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, for instance, doing with the children? How are his dealings with the children? How is he with his wives? And how are his wives with him? Right? How is he with the Jews of Medina, for instance? Right? How is his dealings with the non-Muslims of Medina? And we'll see fascinating examples. And if we go into them, we won't have time to go through them. Just to throw one piece in, just for everyone to look up, is, for instance, the Constitution of Medina, or known as the Mithaq al-Medina, in which, and you can check this out for yourself, if you look for the Constitution of Medina, you can look at where Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when he was called into Medina as a mediator, that he included, right, the Jews and the Christians as part of the Ummah at the time. And therefore you have instances and stories, for instance, where Jews were participating in war alongside Muslims in, for example, Battle of Uhud. And they were giving away their wealth before they left to the orphans of Medina. So these are Jews. They hadn't accepted Islam, right, because they had their own barriers and their own challenges, but they understood, as based on that constitution, that we are in this together. And that's why, and that's why later on, when some of the tribes amongst the Jews went against Prophet ﷺ, they weren't just going against the Prophet. No, they were going against a binding constitution, a binding agreement, which was taken very, very seriously, and which meant war. So coming back from that, we need to go back to Prophet ﷺ, look at the beauty in his life, and take from there in order to present that. And for us, that is true da'wah, where our da'wah is more physical in nature than just verbal. Albeit both are as important as each other. That's very important to say.
Yeah, absolutely, Sheikh. Should we look at the other question that was posted on here?
Yep. Shall I read that out?
Yeah, tafadhal, Sheikh.
Right. Okay. So that's from Sister Natalia.
Sister Layla.
Yeah, Sister Layla. So I have a question: how to engage my children in Islamic education? I do nothing now because both children are very skeptical about Allah, because after I have converted into Islam, we as a family go through so many tests and trials that children think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes us. They are not mature enough to understand that tests and trials are from Allah to get closer to him. And I think, Sister Layla, you've answered the question yourself in those very own words, that they are not mature enough to understand. And ultimately, when we ourselves begin to say that, we're having all these tests, this from Allah, if we start directly connecting all the difficult situations we're in to Allah, then automatically children at that age, they're going to start building up this kind of worldview that anything that bad happens is a punishment from God, right? But what we also need to do, we need a balance here. We need a balance. And we need to focus, for instance, on the hadith where, like, where Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is mentioned, inna Allaha jameel yuhibbul jamal, that indeed Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty. So, and then if we look at the the most famous 99 name, Allah has many more than that, but the one hadith that I'm referring to, with the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we need to focus on all of them. That something may for us seem like harsh at one point in our lives, right? But then maybe 5 years down the line, we'll go back and think, that so-and-so thing that happened, if it wasn't for that thing, which I at that time felt was very difficult, maybe this thing that's happening to me today would not have happened. The good that's happening to me today will not have happened. So just to give you one example, just a personal example, right? So I studied in a Darul Ulum, so an Islamic seminary, for about 8 to 9 years. Following that, I came back and I wanted to become a teacher. And then everywhere I went to, they said, look, you need to have a degree. And at that time, I was like, okay, what's one of those? Okay, because we'd been in Madrasah for 8 years. We thought that's acceptable. 8 years, a degree is only 3 years. And then I came to the realization that what we had done for 8 years was not really acceptable when it came to mainstream education. It wasn't recognized, let's put it that way. And then I had to start all over again almost. So I did a degree, and then a master's, and then a PGC to become a teacher. Yeah. And then what happened was, and whilst I was doing my PGC, it was interesting. There was a conference that we were asked to attend at our own university. And we had PGCE students from various different universities in London. And I met this other alim there, another graduate from a madrasa. So we began talking, and we were we sat next to each other. And I was asking him, so how did you manage to get to PGCE? Because you need a degree. And this was interesting because now in England, so I personally attended a Darul Ulum in the United Kingdom, right here for 8-9 years, not recognized at all. He had attended a Darul Ulum in Pakistan, and the state of Pakistan recognizes your graduation as a master's. Right? Wow. And then when that's translated to England, the master's is translated down as a degree. Right. So that's why he was accepted without doing 3 years and all of that. So anyway, so that's one thing. So he was doing his PGC. I've never met him after that, so we didn't know. But anyway, coming back to the point, after I graduated, and to cut the very, very long story short, I applied to so many different schools to teach. And ultimately, I did a little test and realized that it was actually potentially because of my link to my madrasa. That may seem a bit too extreme for many of our secular schools. Okay, and some of the things that later, when I was invited on radio to talk about this, they said, "Oh, look, is it because you're visibly a Muslim that you'll be more biased?" And then I had to say to them that, look, a lot of the RE teachers I have met, religious education teachers, they are atheists. Are you going to get someone more biased to teach religious education than an atheist? Right? But anyway, coming back to the point, ultimately, I then decided to fulfill my dream earlier than to doing it later on. And that was to open up a madrasa and bring the best of both worlds. Okay. And then what happened was, as a result of that, we opened up our madrasa in December 2014. Now, had I been accepted in any one of those 40 schools, we wouldn't be here talking about Islam.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We wouldn't have many students who are coming to Fatima Elizabeth from Tisri. Okay? None of that would have happened because the amount of paperwork, as we all know, that is given to anyone that works in a school, it's not a hidden secret. It's out there. Everyone knows about that. Everyone knows the stresses that teachers go through. Yeah. They are, I think, possibly them and doctors are possibly the most worked civil servants that are out there, that are working for the state, the most worked, and anyone related to those institutes. So that's when I realized later on that I applied to 40 different places. I didn't get accepted for any one of them. For me, I could have said, look, Allah is punishing me here. But it was only later that I realized, actually, those were not punishments. Those difficulties were actually mercies in disguise.
Yeah.
And now and that's just a very small anecdote, right? A very small anecdote, that at times when things are, and if we look at the prophets, they are probably the most tested out of everyone,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
We have prophets who go through so much difficulty, so much hardship. Some prophets who were even killed, right? Some prophet, and when it comes to Isa alayhi salam, he was almost killed, where he had to be risen up by Allah. And we won't get into the various narrations of how, but that's the basic summary in the Quran, that he wasn't killed, but he was lifted. I mean, their people, their followers, went to that extreme to get rid of them, because their message was extreme, right? In the sense, I mean, if someone was to come now and say that this capitalist system, of every individual, as soon as they're born into slavery, in the sense that they will have to, when they go to university, by the time they finish those 3 years, they will be in a debt of at least £30,000. Okay, try and pay that debt off alongside then a mortgage they have to get, which will take around 30 to 40 years to pay off. Once they've paid it off, how old are they? 60. Okay, and then the state keeps on raising the pension age. I mean, how do you think prophets would have seen this? Would they stay quiet on these kind of issues? And I think that's why their messages were radical, and they got to the heart of the point, and at the heart of problems. And that's why for them, life was not as easy as we want our lives to be. But they were difficult because they were hitting at the core of the problems. And look at Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We think that the message of Tawheed is only a theological one. No, it was a very economical smash that he went for, right at the center. Because if you only worship Allah facing the Kaaba, what that does is that gets rid of all the Quraysh's customers, all of the idols that were brought in. Every tribe, every people had their own idols that were inside the Kaaba. They used to come there as part of the pilgrimage, yes, to worship their own idols, but then go back, do a bit of trade and go back. Yeah. So if Prophet ﷺ is giving that message of one Allah, yes, in principle it is a theological one, but at the same time it was hitting at the economy of Mecca, and that's what they did not like. Right? And that's what they were saying to him. Look, why not let's come to a middle ground where we'll worship your God on one day and you worship ours on the other day. Right. So this is where this is where the prophets were coming in. These were serious issues that they were, and then the retaliation were all tests from Allah. And when we say tests from Allah, I personally think maybe the word test, it takes me back to exams, yeah. And I think when Allah is testing us, it's a completely different thing. There's much more things going around a test from Allah. Okay, it's not 2D, it's 3D, it's multi-dimensional. Okay, it may from one side seem like hardship, but when you take away the concept of time and space, right, it's actually a mercy from Allah. And that can be a mercy in this world within a year, 2 years, 10 years, 20, 30, 100 years, or a mercy in the hereafter. This for an atheist or anyone who does not believe in God may be a cop-out, right? Okay, you're asking people to do so-and-so thing and then leaving the reward in the hereafter. But then we believe, right? We believe in the metaphysical world. We believe there's beyond just the physical as Muslims, right? And then we also believe that once we get to the metaphysical, once we get to the hereafter, that's when we will look back and say, I wish I had problems all the time. I wish I had issues all the time and I did sabr on them, because now the metaphysical life, which is an eternal life and forever, right? Here I want to be benefited more. So this is where I think it's important to have that balance. Children are not going to be that mature, especially here in the West, and especially if they're coming from a family where the mother or father have converted. The challenge is even bigger. That in itself is a great is a trial. And that's where I think those of us who are born Muslim, it's our responsibility as well to help our brothers and sisters who have converted into Islam, or reverted to Islam, whichever word you want to use. It's to help them and be there for them, in the physical sense. and at least comfort them. You know, at least if we can't solve anyone's problem, at least we can be there for them.
Yeah,
That's
and be
the
be a
absolute minimum
support.
we can do.
Yeah,
Be a support. That's the minimum we can
yeah.
do, because at the end of the day, there are certain powers that are out there which will not allow us to make those changes, right?
Mm.
And those are the kind of powers that the prophets kind of clashed against, and we saw the, you know, the revolutions that took place as a result of those clashes.
Mm.
So we, at least on a very social, you know, individual level, can at least be there to support them as much as we can. I think
Yeah.
that is key.
Jeff, just on the first part of the question there. So I do nothing now because both children are very skeptical. So I think linking back to what you said last week about Prophet ﷺ and how he was praying Salah, for example, from a very simple level of when Hassan and Hussein were climbing on top of him, you know, them having that experience of him not just chucking them off him, but letting him literally climb on his back whilst he was doing sujood.
Yeah.
That sort of thing, I think, is really, really important that we sort of bring into our own lives, and the children will that witness that and then therefore experience that and put that into their own learning.
Absolutely. No, I definitely agree with that, Sheikh, because and that's what it is. Not everyone's going to be, you know, will have the time to learn about particular special needs. Not everyone has the ability to understand them fully. But what we all have the ability to do is what Prophet ﷺ did, and that was to express his love for each other, express his love with the children, especially in this example, where, you know, today if a child keeps on running in front of us in Salah, right, we will be angered by them, whereas Prophet was quite the opposite. So I think the minimum we can do is continuously give the most love we can to children. Sometimes we will become frustrated, and that can be we as parents, we as teachers, as scouts, or anyone else. But we've got to step back and rethink the world. We put ourselves in that child's or ourselves in the children's shoes, and think about what are they going through. And in the case of where Sister Layla is talking about her son, that he's going through various different layers of problems, and then the added layer of being a child of someone who's converted to Islam, and that brings its own difficult dilemmas and situations, is to step back and really try and understand where they are coming from. Sister Layla has just responded, so I'm just going to read that out and then try and see if we can respond to that and end on that point as well. So my son stopped participating in classroom environment since autumn. The school kept him in ASD provision for a long time, and he only started to partially participate in learning in classroom environment after Christmas. When I collect him from school, most of the time is stressed. So the child is stressed. Yeah. So he enjoys the lockdown because there is no need to go to school, and which he doesn't like. Social situations are causing a lot of stress for my son. The Senko at school completed the special questionnaire to test if my son is on autistic spectrum. I have no idea how to re-engage him in Madrasah. We are also isolated from the Muslim community. We stopped going to Scouts too because the volunteers at Scouts have no idea how to support my son, and I myself don't want adults to add on his distress. I see that the only way for my children to re-engage in Islamic education is individual one-to-one classes. I need information about cost of such lessons. So so again, and this is messages for all madrasas, especially that every child that walks through our doors is going through 101 problems, right? Are we adding to that, or are we relieving some of those from them? That's comes down to our epistemology. And Jazakallah for mentioning that to us, Sister Natalia, Sister Leda. And it's a point of reflection. And again, you may want to consider homeschooling, because if he is happy in lockdown, where you feel as a mother, and no one can know your child better than yourself.
So you're the expert of your own child, yeah.
Absolutely. Let's get that straight. And that's for everyone. There is no special educational needs teacher or coordinator who will know your child better than you, and you feel that he is coming home stressed all the time. So obviously, special education, the Senkos will know in terms of certain aspects of his learning or certain behavioral issues from an academic perspective and theoretical perspective, that's absolutely fine, and that's where they are very, very important. But knowing your child's emotions, that comes from the mother herself, and you're feeling that he's continuously stressed, and now you feel that in lockdown he is happy and he's enjoying it. I mean, every child is different, every human is different, and the way every human today is reacting to this lockdown is interesting, because some people in one extreme are becoming suicidal because they are always out and about. Now having them in one place is similar to being imprisoned. Whereas we'll have others who are introverts, and then you'll have some who are extreme introverts. For them, lockdown is paradise. It's heaven on earth. They don't have to meet anyone. They can be at home. They can work from home. I mean, that's an introvert's dream, isn't it?
Dream, yeah, absolutely.
So, and there's various degrees in between all of that. So again, so Sister Leila, I think this is something that you may want to consider. But even when it comes to homeschooling, my personal belief is that's possibly one of the best ways of educating children. But it depends on how the parents, how well they can manage that, and how well they can facilitate that. Now, myself, I don't think I would be a good homeschooling parent, because the way I've lived, I don't have that kind of structure in my life. It's very ad hoc. Okay, now these qualities might be good for certain things, they might not be good for certain other things. So whereas some children will need some kind of structure during the day, they would need parents who can give them that.
And just on that, Sheikh, one of my cousins actually had ASD, or has ASD, and he actually went through home education.
And Sheikh, could you also explain to the listeners about ASD?
ASD, yes. ASD is autistic spectrum disorder. So if someone has autism, shorthand, we say they have ASD. So my cousin actually had ASD, or he has ASD, he's on the spectrum, and he went through the home education system. It got to a point where I think he got to maybe year 10 or 11, where he felt he needed to develop a little bit more and actually go through the school system as a result of that. But you're actually right, Sheikh. The environment which my auntie and uncle were able to give him was much more structured and suited to his needs, and that might not be the case for everybody out there.
Absolutely, yeah. And coming back to Sister Leila's point about one-to-one, that might be the case. Currently in lockdown, I don't think that would be a wise thing to do because of social isolation. I don't know how your children may react to learning online, one-to-one online. That's something that we can talk about. So you can contact us regarding that via WhatsApp as well. So we can look into that. So just to let everyone else know, and we'll kind of wrap up on this point as well, that alhamdulillah, on a weekly basis, our madrasa now has about 143 online sessions. That includes these weekday lessons that we have. So please join us if you want to. We also have weekend lessons, which are only for our students. It's not open to everyone else. But that's where they do like half an hour tajweed sessions individually with our teachers. We also have Islamic studies where all students get together. For them, that's a chance to still have some form of connection with their friends and their teachers. And like we mentioned, we had to force ourselves to do this as a result of the lockdown. It's not something that we normally would have done in a normal situation. But so that's what it is. So it's down to you how you're going to look at that. If you're talking about lockdown, or you're talking about after lockdown, and then it also depends on how long this lockdown is going to be. So you might want to think of the short term now, and then long term after that.
I think just to touch on one of the points that she mentioned about sort of re-engaging in Islamic education. So I think it quite links in quite well with the topic that we're talking about in terms of being in that Islamic environment. For all kids, or for everybody, if you take someone and put them in a situation in the first week, they're always going to struggle and find it a bit alien or new to them. But week by week, they'll slowly grow into being in that environment. And I think the same would automatically apply here. It's about making them feel a lot more comfortable, making them feel happy to be in an Islamic environment, essentially. So, it's something to think about post-lockdown, inshallah.
Inshallah, no, definitely. And we have reached the end of our time. So normally our sessions would be anywhere between half an hour to an hour maximum. So sometimes you'll find us doing very short sessions. So today we went up to the full capacity, and we do have a session starting at 7, and we need to get pray out asr in between, and just get ready for that, because that session will finish bang on Maghrib time. So that's that. But just in summary, again, I would like to thank Ustad Daniel for sharing his time with us, and especially the specialism that he has, and in our context now as a Muslim who's working in the NHS for special educational needs. So he's the Senko for NHS. If you have any questions, if you have family that you want to ask questions on behalf of, if you want them to ask any questions, it could be anything related to special needs in Islam, and we can try and have a discussion about it. That's what it's about. So this is not like a consultation or anything like that. It's just an open discussion. We started off with about only 3-4 people. And then it's just a discussion between myself, Ustad Daniel, and then the attendees who come onto this. And if you have any other ideas for us, if you want us to talk about certain specific things, please let us know. What we will do down the line, down the few weeks, is maybe take one different type of special educational need and just talk about it in very basic terms. And the purpose of that would be for parents, for madrasa teachers, to understand these different needs, and to try and look back at our student and think, oh, okay, I can relate this to my student, and maybe give some suggestions on how you can differentiate for them. So if there are certain students who are learning in a certain way, how can we differentiate for this particular student? It's not difficult. It should not take time. It shouldn't. Okay. I remember, for example, just a very quick example I'll throw in. We wanted students to learn about mosques, or how a masjid is, right? And they were going to talk about, so they were going to draw a picture for them. That was an activity. With a certain age group, they were going to draw a picture of a mosque and just label the different parts of the masjid. And we had a student in that class in our madrasa who we felt was very, very artistic. And for him to draw a mosque would be getting, like a, I don't know, 30-year-old to write down the alphabet. It would have been very, very easy, but at the same time, very, very boring, because it's too easy for them. So all we did was we just differentiated and said, okay, look, instead of you doing a mosque, we would want you to make a mosque out of some form of origami. And that was it. And then what all the teacher had to do was Google up mosque origami or something like that. And there were so many examples that came up. And we have Google there. We don't want to follow it blindly, but we want to use it to facilitate the learning of our children, as long as it's overlooked by teachers. And that was it. And then he got on with that. We're talking about quite a few years back. There's so many things that we can do. We spoke about also madrasas here in the West, why they are more, it's more than just teaching. It's more than just about passing on information. We need to make this confidence centers. So places where children are given confidence in who they are, and especially by way of them being Muslims. So later on, when they do make a choice between the secular ideology and the Muslim ideas and principles and way of living, their experience from their madrasas pushes them towards Islam. That's what it is. So it's way beyond just getting them to do certain things, forcing them to pray salah. It's beyond that. It's about giving them the importance of salah, the beauty of salah. Why are we doing this? What impact does this have, what we're doing physically here, in the metaphysical world? So that's the kind of push that we need to do. And the most important thing is recognizing special educational needs as Muslims. And our children have individual ways of looking at the world. And to facilitate that, help them with that, find out when they are in their element and pursue that. And that's the way forward, I think. And that's just a summary of what we've done today. If you want to add anything, Sheikh, otherwise we'll wrap up here.
I think you've summed it up quite well, Sheikh. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah. Jazakallah, everyone, for joining us again. If you want to get in contact with us, if you are not a parent in a madrasa, you can always email us on info@fatimaelizabethfrontistery.co.uk. If you want to find that, just Google Fatima Elizabeth and our website should come up. You can find our contact details there. And you can just contact us directly. If you have our numbers, do send us messages regarding this session. Any questions, and we will keep that at the forefront for our next session. Jazakallahu khair. Subhanallah bihamdi. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdi. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta.